For 30 years, she never showed her face. She arrived in a small town in central Germany in February 1807. She came in a closed carriage. She was escorted by a man who called himself a count. He told the townspeople that she needed protecting, not from anything specific, just that she required protection, and that her name and her past were not their concern. She stayed behind closed doors. When she did venture out, which was rarely, she traveled in a carriage with the curtains drawn, or walked in the garden behind the estate, wearing a heavy dark veil. For 30 years, nobody saw her clearly. The townspeople gave them a name. They called them the Dunkelgrafen, the Dark Counts. Nobody knew who they were. Nobody knows now. This is one of the most persistent unsolved mysteries in European history, a story that touches the French Revolution, the executed King and Queen of France, and a question that scientists thought they finally answered in 2013. They were wrong about that last part. On February 7, 1807, a man and a woman arrived in the town of Hildburghausen, in the German state of Thuringia. Hildburghausen was the seat of the Duchy of Saxe-Hildburghausen, a small, unremarkable duchy of the kind that Central Europe was full of in the Napoleonic era. A duke, a small court, a town that mostly went about its business. It was not the kind of place where strangers stayed forever. This couple did. The man presented himself as Count Vavel de Versailles. He was well-dressed, well-spoken, and clearly had money. He arranged lodgings. He secured the protection of the local duke. He was polite, precise, and said almost nothing about where they had come from, why they were there, or who the woman was. He made two things clear. They were not married. He was not her lover. He was her protector. That was the word he used, protector. In 1810, they moved into Eschhausen, a small secluded castle a short distance from the town, and they did not leave it again for the rest of their lives. What do we actually know about her? Almost nothing. She was seen occasionally, in the garden, moving quickly, head down, always veiled. She was reportedly afraid of loud noises. She wore clothing embroidered with small fleur-de-lis, the lily symbol of the French royal family. Visitors to the castle sometimes glimpsed her through windows or at the end of corridors, always retreating. The Count, who over the years became a familiar, if still mysterious, figure in the area, spoke about her to almost no one. When he did, it was only to make clear that her privacy was non-negotiable, that she was in his care, that her identity was not their concern. The townspeople speculated as townspeople do. The theories multiplied, the story spread beyond Hildburghausen. People came from elsewhere hoping to catch a glimpse of the veiled woman. They never did. To understand the most persistent theory about who she was, you have to go back to Paris in 1789. The French Revolution began as a political crisis and became one of the most violent episodes in modern European history. The royal family, King Louis XVI, Queen Marie-Antoinette, and their children were swept up in it completely. In August 1792, the monarchy fell. The family was imprisoned in the Temple, a medieval fortress in Paris converted into a prison. They were stripped of their status, their servants, almost everything. Louis XVI was guillotined on January 21, 1793. Marie Antoinette was guillotined on October 16, 1793. Their youngest daughter had died in infancy. Their son, Louis Charles, known to royalists as Louis XVII, was separated from his mother and sister, handed over to a shoemaker to be re-educated as a good Republican, and died in the Temple in June 1795. He was 10 years old. That left one surviving child. Her name was Marie-Thérèse Charlotte. She was 17. She had been alone at the Temple for months, and she did not know until close to her release that every member of her immediate family was dead. In December 1795, on the eve of her 17th birthday, she was released, exchanged for French prisoners held by Austria. She left Paris in secret, traveling incognito under the name Sophie. She crossed into Austria, went to Vienna, and eventually married her cousin Louis Antoine, the Duke of Angoulême. She lived on, as the historical record tells it, until 1851. She is buried in a Franciscan monastery in what is now Slovenia. But some people noticed something. When Marie-Thérèse arrived in Vienna, those who had known her as a child said she seemed changed. Her appearance was different. Her manner was different. The childhood portraits bore little resemblance to the woman who had arrived from Paris. The change was easy to explain. She had watched her parents go to the guillotine. She had lost her brother. She had been held in a medieval prison for 3 years, alone, with almost no human contact. Of course she was changed. Anyone would have been. But there was another explanation. one that captured the imagination and never quite let go. The substitution theory holds that the real Marie-Thérèse never made it to Vienna at all. Traumatized by what she had endured, possibly pregnant after abuse during her imprisonment, she refused to re-enter public life. During the journey from Paris to the Austrian border in 1795 and 1796, she switched places with another woman. The woman who arrived in Vienna as Madame Royale, the sole survivor, the Duchess of Angoulême, was not Marie-Thérèse at all. And the real Marie-Thérèse? Hidden, protected, living behind a veil in a German castle. The details that kept the theory alive were specific. The Dark Countess wore clothing embroidered with the Bourbon lily. Her companion had been in Paris in 1798 and 1799, present in the right place at a moment when the fate of the French royal family was still a matter of the highest political consequence. Marie-Thérèse had traveled under the incognito name Sophie, and the name given for the Dark Countess at her burial, Sophia Botta, was a name that appeared in no record anywhere before the day she died. On November 28, 1837, the woman the town had always called the Dark Countess died in Eschhausen Castle. She was buried quickly. Accounts differ on whether there was any religious service at all. The count gave her name to the authorities as Sophie Botta, a single woman from Westphalia. The physician who certified her death noted that she appeared approximately 60 years old, placing her birth around 1777. Researchers who later tried to verify the existence of Sophie Botta found nothing: no birth record, no baptismal record, no trace of such a woman in Westphalia or anywhere else in any register before the day she died. She was buried in a garden on the hill of Schullersberg, a garden she had bought herself in 1820. Whether that fact tells us something about who she was, or simply that she had money and wanted a corner of the world she could call her own, we cannot say. The Count stayed in the castle for 8 more years. He died on April 8, 1845. He was buried in the churchyard of Eschhausen. The castle was demolished in 1873. The secret died with the man who kept it. After his death, researchers eventually identified him. His real name was Leonardus Cornelius van der Valk. He had been born in Amsterdam in 1769 and had served as secretary at the Dutch embassy in Paris from July 1798 to April 1799. He was educated, socially connected, and had been present in Paris at a moment when the question of what had happened to France's surviving royal daughter was still politically alive. Why did this man spend nearly 40 years, almost half his life, guarding a woman whose identity he refused to reveal even when she was dead? Nobody knows. He left no memoir, no letter of explanation, no deathbed confession. He gave nothing away. If he was protecting a traumatized woman who had refused to re-enter the world, he did it completely. If he was protecting someone else entirely for reasons no one has ever uncovered, he did that too. He was either one of the most devoted protectors in history or one of the most successful keepers of a secret. Possibly both. In October 2013, nearly 200 years after the Dark Countess arrived in Hildburghausen, scientists exhumed her remains. The goal was to compare her DNA against samples that could confirm or deny any relationship to Marie-Thérèse. The scientists used mitochondrial DNA, which passes through the maternal line from a known maternal descendant of Marie Antoinette's sister and from the preserved heart of Louis XVII, which had already been tested in an earlier case. The comparison was unambiguous. The Dark Countess was not related to Marie-Thérèse. She was not the daughter of Marie Antoinette. The substitution theory, at least in its most famous form, was wrong. She was solemnly reburied on November 7, 2013. And the question that had been building for nearly 2 centuries, changed shape. It was no longer, was she Marie-Thérèse? It became something harder with no obvious answer. Who was she? Here's what we know for certain. A man and a woman arrived in Hildburghausen in February 1807. The man was a Dutch diplomat who had been in Paris at a moment of enormous historical consequence. The woman wore a veil for 30 years. She wore clothing that may have carried the symbol of French royalty. She was afraid of loud sounds. She was buried quickly, under a name that does not exist in any historical record before the day she died. The man who protected her kept his secret absolutely. She was not Marie-Thérèse. We know that now. The castle is gone. Her grave is there, on the hill at Schullersberg, in the garden she chose for herself. But whoever she was, someone thought she was important enough to hide for a lifetime. Someone thought her face was dangerous enough to cover for 30 years. Someone thought her name was dangerous enough to replace entirely. On the stone, it says Sophie Bada. It may be the only lie left standing. The story of the Dunkelgrafen has been told and retold in Germany for 2 centuries, in novels, in historical essays, in arguments that still run through academic journals and online forums devoted to the fate of Marie-Thérèse Charlotte of France. If you want to go deeper, Susan Nagel's biography of Marie-Thérèse covers both the historical record and the substitution theory in detail. And if this is the kind of story you come here for, the ones where the answer to one question only opens another, there are more in the backlog. No algorithm, no pressure, just the ones that should have been remembered